the Bites of Wisdom podcast. You got John, Jeremy, and special guest Dr. Mike's back. Ozzy won't be here tonight because I don't know, he doesn't like talking to us anymore.
Probably
Or he's
pickleball.
busy, or he's got life, or something. But he'll be back soon.
Does he use
we got a
CrowdStrike?
couple topics that are a little timely, so I think we're going to go right on into it and go. Let's start with you, John. What do you think about CrowdStrike and the blue screen of death? I have strong opinions.
I'll have to say, unlike majority of the world on Friday, I did not spend all my day with CrowdStrike. I only spent part of my day with CrowdStrike. It's a failure of so many things. I don't even know. I don't even know how to begin. Well, I think I'd begin with how my day began. I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning and to a text message that said that Microsoft 0365 services are down from one of my team members. And my wife woke up and of course I'm looking at the Microsoft outage page and I noticed a little blurb in there about CrowdStrike causing problems as well. I was like, oh no. My wife asked me, she's like, is there an outage? Like, what's wrong? And I was like, you're going to read about this one. And I just went downstairs and made myself a cup of tea. Yeah. Kernel mode, null pointer dereferencing.
Well,
never a good thing.
Just to clarify here, it's not just that it's null pointer dereferencing, it's because of something they put in a configuration file that they didn't have to test, right?
Well, yeah, Microsoft's was a WHQL testing does not include configuration, right? So if there's a dynamic aspect that gets around the testing that they do for those drivers, then yeah, it's like everything else in the world.
But why is configuration? How do you get to a null in a configuration? Am I leading the witness? No, we're going too deep already. But yeah, it's fucking. This whole thing is a mess, an unmitigated mess.
You know, we're recording this a few days after the actual event, and there's still, at least I haven't read an actual root cause analysis from CrowdStrike. I don't know if one exists.
They still have not. They have not written one.
Yeah,
they've apologized in a lot of different ways.
They've written a technical quotation mark description, which I would describe more as a explanation rather than an analysis. I'm using explanation very euphemistically here.
Yes, because they're not sys files, they're not kernel files, they're configuration files, channel files, or whatever.
The most infuriating thing about this was just the lack of they just YOLO'd the world.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a delayed release. There wasn't, clearly they don't do any kind of, partitions when they release. They don't do like
green
deploys.
You can do that, but it's a buried configuration in Falcon that you have to go find because they stand by.
I'm sorry, for a company like that, you shouldn't have the option of just deploying to a single.
I'm telling you, I'm like, as soon as your installation hits 100 devices, it should be staged automatically.
Correct.
Just very, very simply. And it should detect when it's on an Active Directory and go, this one's second to last.
Or maybe not at all. Or maybe run the stable version.
Well, I mean, every company, every security company in all of history that does scanner updates has fucked this up.
Yeah, the last one
Microsoft.
The last one I read about was McAfee, who actually the CTO was the CEO of CrowdStrike.
Well, Microsoft did it a couple times in the last 2 years with Defender.
Yeah, but let's be clear here, okay? I mean, you can attribute it to, clearly, we got the same guy at two locations, but he's not the, even as I'm the guy who basically gave him a huge talk about how Jack Welch is the corrupting devil himself. This is representative of this. Is, as Jeremy says, this is just, it happens. And it happens because we've got a lot of recklessness here. I mean, a key part of this recklessness is we've made a strong justification that antivirus software, that endpoint agents have to constantly be outside of the update. They have to have their own distinct update cycle that they control. And so let's be clear. You have an update cycle for opaque software that's given ring 0 access.
Already a bad.
Yes.
It's a little wrong.
Well, I mean, the truth of the matter is that most of us will not allow the Office suite to update outside of IT's control. But we have a very specific reason that we let the endpoint agents go update, because shit move fast.
And I think that's the important thing is, I was arguing with somebody on LinkedIn, and I'm like, look, I have a couple things I want to talk about, but one of them is Microsoft's just as much to blame as CrowdStrike. Well, CrowdStrike is to blame for this. Microsoft is just as much to blame. They should not allow a box to blue screen to death in Deathloop. It is easy to detect, it's easy to respond to, and it's easy to deal with. How long have they been doing this? 25, 30 years? How many times have they fixed it? Oh, they'll upload it to their servers, but they won't provide you a way to remove or update the instance as across your fleet. They've done this for years. Microsoft is just as complicit. They have a way to fix this, and they choose not to. Instead, they release a study they release a press release where they say, who's at fault? The EU, because the EU wouldn't let us lock down security to only be Microsoft products, because they required us to allow other security modules. They literally just released that earlier today. What a bunch of piece of shits. Telling me, my software that I can't guarantee you that I can't restart after blue screening a kernel driver, that I know where the seg fault was, that I won't let it reboot, then I'm going to say that it's because of regulation that I can't.
Very, very salty in this particular one, aren't we? I mean, I'm just ever so slightly.
Listen, I agree that Microsoft is at fault. I don't know if I can agree that they're just the same. Like, it's not that, like,
why would you?
Fault.
Well, great. Let's talk about this. Why would we accept Microsoft to allow a system to reboot into a blue screen of death, not record the module or kernel driver that did it, and blindly load it again, and as many times as it comes up?
The remediation involves rebooting into safe mode, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, one of the ways to remediate, yes.
Yeah. Just to add to the pain of this, because the reason I'm just thinking about that is because one of the things that we're dealing with here is, so almost all computer reliability, safety, and security measures boil down to rewind to a safe state and reboot in that safe state. And then the challenge is always, how do we ensure that we're in that safe state without causing damage to whatever we're doing organizationally? We've all seen malware that's really, really good at squirreling itself away in the damnedest places. And that's just part of the hell that we're dealing with here, which is that we're dealing with adaptive cleverness. And I mean, I'll go even further and say, because there's a whole line of reasoning in sort of esoteric programming language and security research on things that are called weird machines. Okay. So there's a paper by a guy named Stephen Donlan, and the title of the paper is "Move is Turing Complete."
Yep. The fact that I read this has got issues.
Like move, like MOV.
Yeah, MOV, the assembly language instruction. You can implement entire programming languages in Move.
But and like I don't want to give CrowdStrike. I'm not trying to take the fault away from CrowdStrike from deploying. I do think computers, you need to have a good deployment policy. Like they need to have better defaults. They need to have rings, like deployments phases. All this stuff makes a lot of sense. But the part that pisses me off is Microsoft. Not because they did anything worse in the past. It's because they're writing like, hey, that's their fault.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, pointing the finger, saying, it's those damn Europeans.
But then at the same time, what Mike's talking about is we need to demand better from everybody. Like, this is horseshit. We were arguing on our little chat group, and people are talking about, like, well, my mainframes always stay up. Yeah, they do. Because they were coded back by people that were solving a problem, not trying to jump on some bandwagon. And they've been tested by pushing forward constantly and fixing bugs. Not going to drop it. Oh, no, let me do my new technology. I'm going to go get a new programming language. No, this one's known. The bugs are known.
Well, I can run Kubernetes on my mainframe.
Well,
should you?
You can run anything you want on a mainframe. I mean, mainframes were the original cloud architectures. In fact, to a large extent, what cloud systems are is mainframe billing with PC reliability.
All right. I'm putting... I have a new thing for my LinkedIn. Wait. Is that the first time you've said this?
Yes, it is the first time I've said this.
I'm getting a shirt made because that's my new fucking favorite line.
This is like the Microsoft thing is more just sort of emblematic of enshittification, which is just that Microsoft is taking this as an opportunity to say, hey, all of this can be solved if you give us a monopoly.
They're jealous of Apple's monopoly.
Well, I mean, we all know that. Everyone's jealous of Apple's however much money they make every year.
Right.
I couldn't help myself, John.
As long as they continue to spend money producing for all mankind, I'm fine.
I can't wait for the next season. So getting on the CrowdStrike portion.
Yeah.
Real quick.
Wait, I sidetracked this conversation?
Yeah.
No way.
I mean, I don't know how anyone could trust them at this point. Like, you're going to have to massively discount this product for an even.
So I have this thing. I have this thing about computer security where we've got these implicit and decaying contracts. So, for example, like we never talk, emails. The fundamental pillar of email security is reading email. And we don't really bring that up to people that, you have no email privacy. You're just trusting. Well, you're not even trusting because you just don't think about it. And, like one of the points I've made to people over the years is that endpoint agents, the difference between an endpoint agent and a rat is basically who's paying for it. And the thing is, we've never really had the civic conversation that I think is necessary for this. And this is the reason I'm pausing and going blah, 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 blah about this is because this is sort of my little corner of heresy in the information security world. And my little corner of heresy is that I do not believe it is possible to effectively defend systems or organizations without a certain amount of surveillance. And for operational people, that's kind of the most obvious thing in the world. But, there's a good chunk of the information security community which is very heavily dedicated to the idea that we can. And I've never seen compelling proof that we can run everything like that. I mean, we've seen that with email. Part of the reason that we've all moved to quasi-oligarchic email providers is because they can use their huge lens to read everybody's email and then identify all of the obvious asymmetric attacks. It's kind of like running from the barbarians into the castle and giving up your service to the Lord at that point. So, I mean, And this is a very Mike thing, which is kind of have to have this long chain of airy persiflage that kind of goes back to original sin or something like that, and doesn't actually answer anything, but sounds really cool. And
Well,
I think part of the problem we've got here is that people don't really think about what these tools imply technically or socially. Like if you ask the average man on the street, why do you pay for your McAfee antivirus subscription? And they'll say something to the effect of, because it protects my computer. How? I don't know. It does computer protecty things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But what we're dealing with here is, Falcon is, but all of these tools are basically interchangeable. They've got a threat intelligence service. They feed that information into the application. The application goes and drills down and everything. And this, the whole thing about it being a configuration file, that is a classic software developer dodge. I have not written a program. I've modified the configuration. Therefore, don't run me through any kind of compliance on it. The program hasn't changed.
Right.
And feel free to stop me as I go into the weird machines point about this. But what we're really dealing with there as well is there is no difference between code and data.
No.
From an execution perspective, a program is just a configuration file in itself. It's just it's just what configuration file reads that configuration file. And so,
turtles all the way down.
Exactly. It's a complete end run. Turtles all the way down. And this sort of drives me crazy when I talk to formal verification people, because I'm like, these distinctions you're making do not exist mechanically. We can build systems to enforce it, but that system to enforce it is itself an exploitable system.
And the part that kills me with all of this is that it won't change. It can't change because there's too much incentive to continue using what people like and know. There's almost a religion around programming and not trying to make it better and using what you've always had. You know what I mean? It's quasi. It's like, hey, I love C because C's great. And I actually like writing in C. But come on, we can try something. We can. I don't want to rewrite everything because that's always a big mistake. But why do we still need to be writing our freaking every tool in
Rust, right, Jeremy?
There's nothing as exciting as manually plotting out your memory allocation on graph paper.
I'm gonna go get some paint. Give me 1 second.
We should expect more. And to Colin's point is, we won't. It's turtles all the way down, and nobody wants to go all the way down those layers. Their value is standing on top of those layers.
Have I talked to you guys about the weak and strong theorem of information security that me and John McHugh bandy around all the time?
No. Enlighten us.
John McHugh is one of the grand old men of information security. John and I John's a formal methods head originally. And John and I have had this long back and forth about whether it is possible to build so this is the strong version of the theory. It is not possible to build a non-trivial, user-interactive, timing-dependent application which always executes predictably. Okay?
That's my intuition strongly agrees with that, but I couldn't formally prove it.
It involves things on decidability that I do not have the desire to figure out. Because here's the weak version, okay? The weak version is that the discussion is moot because the market will not reward anyone building it. And so that's the problem that we've got, basically, is we're always going to end up with unpredictable software. And I was thinking about this in the context of, do you remember Dan Bernstein, things like DJB DNS?
Oh, I love his stuff. It's the most unreadable code ever, but he actually checked his error messages.
Yeah, but the thing about Dan's stuff is it also is very frozen in time because, he's got a very specific build tool chain for it. A tool chain at this point, I believe, is basically dead.
Yes. So DJB is a good example. So I don't know if the reason why I liked this stuff wasn't because he did it the best, because he was rigorous. He was one of the only people I've ever seen that checked the error codes from printf.
Yes.
Do you know that there's an error code that comes out of printf and C?
I do.
Most people don't. He checked every single one. He built them into his libraries. He made the fundamental structures boring by doing it all the hard way over and over and over again. But it was relatively small code because of it, and it solved a problem repeatedly, and that's it.
Yep.
But everybody hated that stuff. Like, literally, there was a small cohort of people that used it, but it was by and large rejected. Except for that, understand that the daemon tools model, I would say, is probably the most used init system on the planet now. John's like, what? What?
Well, when you say daemon tools,
the Docker containers now use the daemon tools and init tools as almost standard, so they're everywhere now.
Yeah, I mean, but really, ultimately, what you're go ahead.
Oh no, I'm just thinking that if I remember correctly, at one point, DJB and Theo actually had a flame war.
They did.
Oh, I'm sure.
Okay. Yes.
I mean.
In case our audience doesn't know, DJB was an opinionated person about he wrote a DNS server years and years ago.
And Theo was another opinionated person.
He wrote OpenBSD. He was the lead developer for OpenBSD and still is. He broke away from NetBSD because of disagreement of how to do everything.
Yes.
And he has a very strict opinion on how to write systems. Yes. Both of those people do a pretty good job if you look at their software, though. I don't know where to take this, so I'm going to pause for a second. John, back to CrowdStrike. We had a small tangent of a bet that most people would be interested in. I'm going to make the bet that it won't matter to CrowdStrike within 12 months, that their stock will be unimpacted and they will be back and by and large matches the market. And I don't know how to make a bet on that because it's really hard to predict them, but I'm going to make a bet they're going to have miss a couple quarters and they'll be back to normal.
What you're saying is that they're going to close in a year. Is that what you're saying? At the price that they were before.
Assuming the rest of the market, like if the rest of the market tanks, they're going to take some too, but that's what I'm trying to come back correct for.
Yeah.
Because by and large, and while this was bad, and I mean, it was bad, people don't switch. Companies have long-term contracts. They're not going anywhere. They're going to have some trouble getting some sales, and they're going to spend a lot more in marketing, and they'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, listen, their financials are good. Like they're really not. Good. It's not a company that's. I mean, that's hard. Do I think they're going to? I don't think they're going to get back to 30% a year.
I would expect they're going to bounce back simply for the reason that all of the endpoint agent companies are interchangeable. There's this thing I think about, which when I've talked to people, I think of it as the threat intelligence trap, which is that basically all of these companies start out with one little piece of secret sauce, their technical secret sauce. But once they get installed, what they're basically doing is leveraging the system to find out about different categories of malware, and then they're doing threat intelligence analysis. And really, at that point, all they really are is a threat intelligence delivery platform.
Right.
What are they going to do? They're going to examine memory. They're going to block some processes. I mean, this is,
And it's not the technical secret sauce. There's economies of scale that they get. And one of the advantages that truly happen of why CrowdStrike and Microsoft are such big players in this world is because they have the economies of scale to do that and see more than everybody else.
This is like the thing I was saying about the email providers. The reason we go to the large email providers is because they're large enough. I mean, they knock out 90% of the spam because 90% of the spam is easily detectable when you've got a large lens. And that's the same thing here. They get an enormous amount of strength from the installed data collection base they've got. Mm-hmm. And at that point, they are just a threat intelligence provider.
And like Google's going to probably try to do this, something like this soon enough with the Wiz, see how they can get more collective intelligence, like we said. And now I guess the only thing they don't have is an endpoint, but they have a lot of DNS traffic.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I mean, the Google Wiz acquisition. I mean, that get rolled in the Google Cloud, right?
Yep. Well, no. So there's a couple security products on top of my in Google Space, Chronosphere, Chrono, whatever. It's their SIM. It's really good at doing huge quantities of data. It's freaking amazing, but it's not got the greatest query language. But they're really close to fabric cobbling a full competitor to CrowdStrike. And they have the other data sources from email to compete with Microsoft. So that's what CrowdStrike's really missing is they don't have the email archiving data that Microsoft has. They can sit there. Microsoft sees every malware before everybody else, and so does Gmail. And so with that, if you have teams able to mine that, you can turn that into basically a castle to protect yourself.
Yes.
And CrowdStrike cannot get there. They don't have the email data. But Wiz plus Google is a good deal. They just don't have the endpoint data, but I don't know if they need it. I wonder if they have enough with the Android and some of the other platforms.
I was going to say, the interesting angle is definitely going to be Android because
certainly Android's a wonderful platform for collecting malware.
Yeah, for collecting everything.
Yes. But they also have the DNS data, and the DNS data leaks off everything.
Yes, and you have an enormous amount of DNS data.
Yeah, they're probably one of the highest, if not the highest, for DNS. Cloudflare's getting pretty big too.
Cloudflare's impressive, but they're not even playing in the security world yet. They keep on dipping their toe, and they're like, "Oh, look at this!
There's a big part of me that hopes that Tailscale doesn't go the way of like if they do an acquisition, if someone acquires them, it's not going to be like Broadcom. It'll be like Cloudflare.
Oh God. Cloudflare would do something with them because they do good with open source. I actually think Google would do something well with them because I think they would align. But the company I actually like the best with Tailscale right now is Teleport.
Yeah, but Teleport's not going to buy Tailscale.
They're not. But I like them because of their identity on the machine, and being able to connect that to the identity of the network and then the identity of the application. I mean, it's just beautiful. But
Kerberos.
Can we remove Kerberos, please? And maybe the Active Directory server that goes with it?
Oh, if you can get Active Directory out of my environment, I will pay you buckets of cash.
All right. I want a percentage of the money saved.
That's not how business works. This isn't Hollywood.
Just think about the potential for so do you guys remember Scorpion?
The movie?
No, the Scorpion, which was like / Scorpion. It was a terrible TV series about an international band of cybersecurity.
Oh, I do remember that.
Yes,
it was like the Numbers vibe, where the dude was like he was like a savant and MIT graduate, and he could like solve cybersecurity problems by looking at the color of the car in the mirror or something.
Exactly.
What?
Yeah, it was just
Is this Red Dwarf or something else?
No, there was this. Okay, so there was this guy.
It actually went for 4 seasons. It was pretty amazing.
Something like that. There was this guy. He was like running a computer security company, and he was really, really good at self-promotion. And so he somehow got a TV deal to create an action adventure series about computer hackers. And just if we're going to talk about like computer security celebrities, that's clearly what we needed.
Oh, I didn't realize that there was a showrunner that was. Oh yeah, Walter O'Brien.
Yeah.
You ever heard of this?
I never heard of this guy. Apparently, he was a Scorpion.
Stated that when he was 13 years old, he hacked into NASA under the pseudonym Scorpion.
Oh my God.
The fact that he's sitting at a Comic-Con.
There's 93 episodes.
Yeah, well, listen. America likes their crime drama.
I mean, let's look at like Walter White, a genius with an IQ of 197. That's the opening line. All right.
So have we beaten the CrowdStrike?
I want to yell at more people for not doing a job with quality control. But hey, they just got laid off. Don't worry.
I mean, someone got laid off, and it's not going to be the CEO.
Not right away. He'll get his golden parachute at some point.
To be fair, there is an interesting question of how many of these failures you're allowed, because that's 2 envelopes now.
It's two.
2 envelopes.
It's 2. Yeah, and he's worth like $3 billion, so does it really matter?
Doesn't matter at all.
So as far as I'm concerned, you can give me $3 billion and I'll crash the world.
Yeah. I think it's time to move on to the next topic.
What is our next topic, Jeremy?
Well, I don't know. We don't normally talk politics, so I don't know how we want to take this, but I think we have talked in the past about how I want to normalize stepping down early. And I think we just had a relatively large stepping down or backing away from the running for president. Biden, has decided not to run for another, or not going to be the nominee for 2024, whatever the exact language is. But I like that. But I think that should have happened sooner, and I think we should normalize that in society. But I think that's a good talking point because there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of Venn diagrams being talked about.
Lots of Venn diagrams. So many Venn diagrams.
So, yeah, I think we should go there. I don't want to get into the politics side, but I do want to get into there is something to be said behind the leadership and choosing when to bow out and letting your ego go and setting somebody else up for the next path. I think it's a little late, but that's my opinion, but I think that's an interesting bit.
So you guys are all familiar with Cincinnatus, right?
No.
Doesn't anyone learn their Roman history?
Has it been on Dan Carlin's Hardcore History? If not, I have not.
Okay, so Cincinnatus is one of those foundational Roman myths. And it's in particular also associated with George Washington. So the Roman political system, under normal circumstances, the pre-imperial Roman system had a position called the consul. And there were 2 consuls in Rome at any time. They were elected for a year. It was the final stage of the political course, as it were. And the Romans had basically a sort of term-limiting system where you couldn't be a consul consecutively. You could be a consul again. But anyway, you had 2 consuls. So the consuls would often be a little bit at loggerheads with each other. So the Romans had a sort of safety valve system, which was the dictator. Okay. And the idea of the dictator was that the dictator had complete control in the case of a civic emergency, but they also had a very tightly bound time limit. I think something like 60 days or something like that. Anyway, so Cincinnatus was a Roman patrician. This is like 450 BC or something like that. I'm sort of got like the Wikipedia page over in the corner, but I'm not going to read off of it. But the story of Cincinnatus is there was an emergency in Rome. He was called in to serve as dictator. He served as dictator for 17 days or so. It was like less than a month. Then he quit. He'd solved the problem. He surrendered his powers and he went back to his farm. And this is one of those sort of foundational myths in Roman culture, and it's one that comes to us today. For example, that's where the name Cincinnati comes from. And there was a American, I don't want to call it retired military society. I'm going to Wikipedia it. Hang on a second. The Society of the Cincinnati. Hereditary society founded in 1783 to commemorate the American Revolutionary War, descendants of the who served in the Continental Army. But in the same way that, with Cincinnatus' surrender, George Washington giving up his power at the end of the second term was very heavily inspired by and referenced by that as well. That concept of surrendering power. was a very novel American thing. In fact, one of the things I have stuck in my head as we're just going through this, because Mike's going to ramble now, is that Dante reserved a special place in hell for a pope who retired. So, Celestine V, he's like in the first or second circle of hell with the inconstant, but he was a pope. He was a monk originally, if I remember correctly. Basically, a guy whose feet didn't touch the earth, and he was convinced to retire, and that led to the election of Boniface VIII, who for Dante was like the essence of papal corruption. So Dante was like, you retire, you broke the contract effectively. But again, I ramble. Point is though that this moment of surrender, when I saw Biden do that, the stepping down, that was my first thought was Cincinnatus.
Yeah, and it's the right thing to do. It is it's really easy to get stuck in that place of hey, I'm the person that can. I'm here now. My ego, not knowing and being stuck in that position. And when you're stuck in that position, like the president, I'm sure everybody's telling you, you're the person we need right now. And on top of that, you kind of believe the environment you're in.
Yeah.
But you have to find a way to get more information. You have to pull back and sit there and say, like, hey, I need to get a deeper opinion. And the amount of leaders that don't do that is staggering.
But Biden didn't do that.
No, he didn't.
The only reason he stepped down is because literally everyone was gonna.
Yes,
but I'm trying to say we should normalize that.
Okay,
the part that should happen is people should sit there and go like, hey, I'm surrounded by people. We don't know what happened in the White House. Telling him he's doing an okay job, fine, whatever. But I'm saying we need to normalize. Look, if you're a leader, you need to get dissenting opinions. You need to go find out what people think far, far away from you. You need to try hard to understand. And I can only guess that's 1,000 times harder as the president of the United States. But you still got to do it.
One of the things that people, once they achieve positions of power, almost invariably do is they work very hard to get rid of dissent. And the reason they do is because it hurts. There's this thing that always sticks in my head from Anders Ericsson, the guy who actually did the 10,000 hours research that Malcolm Gladwell misinterpreted. But one of the points that Anderson makes about education and learning is that effective practice is not fun.
It's horrible.
Because effective practice means confronting what you are bad at. If you're good at something, you pretty much move that off the table. You'll do reinforcement exercises, but to actually learn something, you have to dive into what you are bad at. And, this sort of goes to something I've said before. You see this with Putin, you see this with Xi, you see this with Trump. What they've done, you see this with Musk, is they've worked very hard to surround themselves with people who will not challenge them.
Yeah. And in corporations, I see the same things. How many CEOs are really looking to understand the message being delivered to them? I was talking to somebody a couple of days ago, and I'm like, the most important thing I want you to do as a leader, this other person, I go, find somebody that will do truth to power. That will walk up to you and say, you're being an idiot, and then explain why. And you have to be willing to take that and listen to that hard opinion and that feedback, and they can still be wrong, but you still have to have those people around, because when they're right, you're probably not going to see it.
So the interesting thing about this as well is the sciences are implicitly built around this. So for example, in physics, there's a well-known division between theoretical and experimental physicists, and the two sides are not. I've heard a lot of sniping over the years.
I'm not in that world, and I've heard sniping.
Right. But here's the thing, okay? Even with that structure, the problem of ego and the reinforcement of it is so endemic that there is a joke that sciences basically advance one funeral at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I think we've talked about this with Newton, haven't we?
No.
Oh, so there's this old joke that, Einstein could have, by the time he was 30, Einstein could have spent the rest of his life playing golf and nothing would have changed in the world of physics for him doing that. In Newton's case, if he'd done that, physics would probably have advanced further. And the reason for that was because as he got into positions of power, Newton was a dick. Okay, that's just there's no other two ways about it. He was an absolute dick, and he and his vendetta against the dildo manufacturer. Oh my god. Anyway,
all right, wait.
The dildo manufacturer that's what you said, right?
That is what I said. The dildo manufacturer.
We're gonna come. Do we just take this tangent now?
You want to know about the dildos now, or do we want to know about Newton's dildos now, or Newton's
I can't pass up this
later?
tangent, Mike.
Yeah,
you got to tell me why. What? I must know.
Okay, Newton played obvious favorites. Okay, now the business about that. Okay, so one of Newton's positions after he revolutionized physics was he was the master of the Royal Mint, which had previously been this sinecure featherbedding position, but they gave it to a crazy workaholic. So it was still a sinecure featherbedding position, but he actually improved the efficiency, recoined all the currency in England. And one of the things he was involved in, he built a spy network to catch coin clippers. And there's this one particular clipper who was just incredibly good at his job. And he also, his name was William Challoner. Okay. Yes, William Challenger, 1650 to 1699, serial counterfeit coiner, confidence trickster, eventually proven guilty of high treason by Isaac Newton and was hanged for it. Okay. But this was a guy who, in particular, he had this whole thing where what he'd do is he'd basically sell out his buddies as coin clippers, and then acquire the bounty for them. But there is just this side note, and here we go. Second paragraph in the Wikipedia entry. At various times, he also made and sold dildos and worked as a quack doctor, soothsayer, and sham anti-Jacobite agent provocateur. So yes.
I learned something today, John. How about you? I learned a couple things right there, all at once.
There were reports of imported Italian dildos being sold on St. James Street.
Yes. The finest imported dildos.
I had no idea. I had no idea he had that responsibility at any point in time in his life. I knew he did most of his work, most of his science by 29. But I had no idea about this stuff.
There was this book I read a couple months ago called Isaac Newton, the Asshole Who Invented Modern Physics. Oh, wait a minute. That wasn't the book I got it from. What was the book I got it from? It was a different book. Hang on a second. I gotta look this on now. Isaac Newton. Clockwork Universe, the Principia, Never at Rest.
Who really didn't like this guy?
No.
Let's be clear. When Newton didn't like someone, this was a man who did not have a second gear. Okay.
He did a lot.
He did. He did. Newton and the Counterfeiter, the unknown detective career of the world's greatest scientist, Thomas Levinson. That's the one. Okay.
I read every book recommended. Am I going to read this one eventually?
Oh, you're going to love this one.
I'll give you the book review online in the future. So it's right. But let's pull out of the tangents of dildos and Isaac Newton and all the way back up to, truth to power, retirement, bowing out. John, what are your thoughts?
I mean, listen, I think that there absolutely, is a time when, in every job and for every person that you need to bow out. Like you know it. It might take a longer time for some people to figure it out, but at a certain point when you see your contemporaries, all telling you to leave, and polling numbers, I'm sure. Listen, I'm not a politician, but I think if we don't talk specifically about Biden, and we talk more about, kind of to Mike's point, saying that, the American political system, Washington set the tone of like going 2 terms. And I do think we need term limits for every single role, elected role in the government. And I'm not saying they all term limits need to be the same, but there needs to be a cap on how much damage someone can do. Or how much, because just to finish this thought, I mean, population, your population, your society ages slower than the people that are actually running it, right? It's a longer tail of the laws, of the regulations. I mean, the interesting thing for me, I find this, actually, I don't know if it's interesting or it's sad, but I started watching West Wing again.
You should not watch West Wing.
Listen, it's my type of crack.
It's comfort for liberals.
The point I'm trying to make about West Wing is we're arguing about the same shit that we were 25 years ago. Pretty much, like you could watch any season from West Wing and be like, damn, we just talked about that. It didn't get solved. And did it not get solved because the same damn politicians that were there 25 years ago, the same ones running it now? Maybe.
So I have this. Sorry, Jeremy.
No, I was just trying to figure out how long I could go until I had talked.
Okay. So, like, one of the things that's the flip side of Cincinnatus is Julius Caesar himself. Okay. And, like, I told you about this whole concept of the dictator. Okay. And basically what Kaiser did was he eventually, he's like, we're in a crisis, make me dictator. And then I turned to keep me dictator. I'm going to keep being dictator. What you going to do about it? I am still ambivalent about term limits. And the reason I'm ambivalent about term limits is an issue of power. So, for example, let's say that you put a 10-term limit on a representative, okay? In their ninth term or in their 10th term, the representative has no, power anymore because he's not going to be ongoing. So that's always been something that they've kind of been limited on. On the other hand, there's an argument that imposing these kind of strict limits forces us to make people interchangeable. And I think that that's important because in the inertia, we end up with irreplaceability. And we saw this, for example, with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And similarly, like, what she did in China was explicitly remove the term limits that the Chinese had put in place because they didn't want another round of MAP. So I'm less against term limits than if you caught me, say, 20 years ago, because I think that by introducing them, so for example, let's say that we put Supreme Court justices had a 12-year term limit, or actually, let's say 11-year term limit, okay, or 7. 11. Okay. We would not have the absolutely ludicrous jockeying that we had when Ginsburg died, with McConnell inventing new rules and all of that. These were just
I mean, that's not
Mhm.
true. I still think you'd have that.
Oh, you're definitely going to have it, but you're not going to have this situation where you've got like Supreme Court justices hanging on respirators for the last minute. Like one of the first things that's going to happen if Trump gets reelected
Right.
is Thomas and possibly Alito are immediately going to retire.
Maybe not immediately, but by the end of this
But
term.
that's the thing, is the predictability of the cycle means that you have predictability on that. Hey, the normal cycle
Correct.
means that this becomes normalized as appointments, so that this is a less important issue running up to the election, because hey, you're going to get two no matter what, or whatever it is.
Exactly.
And I understand that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And that's exactly what I'm thinking. I mean, it's my fallacy originally was viewing the system as it existed, but the point is that if you introduce that kind of mechanism to support interchangeability, then people are going to have to adjust to it. And and again, with the idea that sort of Caesar sleazed through, and we saw this with G, I'm more in favor of it as a harsh rule now.
I think there's several ways that, obviously term limits could be, if we're talking specifically about the Supreme Court, it could be, that after 12 years, you simply require a renomination and another vote. It might not, it could just be the term. Doesn't mean you're not, couldn't be against being nominated again for another term. It's just, you need to force the issue. You can't have a lifetime appointment for someone who, I mean, at this point, listen, it's pretty blatant corruption at this point.
Well, I mean, but I also think that this is sort of the thing. I mean, I would say just flat out not renomination, because really I think the point would be to say, look, you cannot, there is nobody who is that spectacular that we just have to have them. And I think part of the problem we run into is, especially in the United States, we have a tendency to sort of attach sort of hate or graphic thing to political figures. But, what we want to do is we want to arrest and stop cults of personality before they form. I would like our politics to be boring.
I'm all with you on the boring politics. I want tension. I want boring. And I think that's an intelligent, smart way to think about it, is that it shouldn't be special. It should be your oath of office, 12 years, highest, or 11 years in there. And you're like, hey, look, and I'm going to get a pension fund that's really good, so I don't got to go work for somebody. I can, but it's going to be, if I'm Clarence Thomas, I can go buy that RV and I can go just around the country because I've done my term and I've done my job for the country.
60-day campaign, fixed allotments, term limits, just, yeah. Because, I mean, the other thing is, do you realize how freaking long this electoral cycle has been?
Oh, yeah. It's never stopped.
It doesn't stop.
It doesn't stop. I don't want to spend all my time. I don't want to think about it.
One thing that bothers the hell out of me is like the House is 2 years.
Haven't gotten anything done, by the way, the last 4 years.
There's many reasons why they can't get anything done, but how are you supposed to go run for re-election after 2 years? Try to be this is just, it doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't make sense. One of the things was the House used to be plumbers. It used to be stable boys. It used to be people that came in for 2 years because they got elected and then they went home. But that's not how it is. It's been professionalized. It is a professional organization now. Being a politician is a job that people do. And we need to kind of understand that old idea for the House doesn't work anymore. And we need to figure out a way to get that so that there is a lot less campaigning and a lot less time asking for money.
I mean, this is sort of, it's definitely corrupting influence of money in politics, yada, 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 yada. But, I mean, in this case, it does just lead to this problem with governance. I mean, we have a situation where well, yeah, but this is all sort of like 101 stuff. We need a radical solution.
A dictator for
Like,
60 days.
God, no. Well, I mean, we didn't even get into the things like at one point, since the consuls were elected 2 at a time, and so the Romans would talk about the years in terms of the 2 consuls. So it'd be like it'd be like Kaiser and Cicero or something like that. And one time when Kaiser was dictator, was consul, he arranged for some of his he arranged for some of his people to dump a gigantic vat of dung on the other consul. I think the guy's name was Bibulus. But he ended up basically hiding for the entire year, and they just called that year the consulship of Kaiser and Kaiser.
So it's the more I learn from history, the more I know it's not that weird now. It just feels like it.
Yeah.
It's because everything is being tracked and monitored and taped and tweeted about.
I don't think we're going to get to any definitive answers on any of these questions, but I'm just glad somebody stepped down from power. And I think more people need to do it. And I'm not talking about just politics. I'm talking about good succession plans in corporations. I think people should step down. I don't play basketball, so I'm gonna get a lot of hate. Maybe LeBron James is playing basketball for too long. Maybe it's time to step down. I don't know. But it feels like you can't do things forever, and it's time to pass the torch. And people need to make that okay.
Yeah.
So that's actually a good. I'd like to just click into that. I know we're running long, but the point of
here, of course, we're running long.
The point of LeBron James, though, I mean, at what point do you step down? Like LeBron's still performing. Is he performing like he was when he was 20? No.
I have no idea. I just use it because I know he's been like he's playing against his son or something. That's the only reason why I knew he's old.
Yeah. That doesn't really mean much, but yeah.
I know nothing about basketball, so I'm just reaching. I can do plenty of other things, like corporations, up and out. Like, how many times have you seen a department head where you're like, you've been here for 20 years, you've done a great job, but you're not going to ever change anything. You've done it the same way for 20 years.
Peter Principle, right?
Yeah. Is that the Peter Principle? I don't know.
Well,
the Peter Principle is hierarchy and individuals promoted to their level of incompetence.
Yes.
But at some point in time, that head should just sit there and be like, there's no forcing function for me to leave. But if I don't leave, the place will stagnate. So I should leave. And that isn't normalized in most corporations. It isn't normalized in most organizations. And I think we should. There should be nothing wrong with the head of a department that's been really successful saying, nope, I'm going to make a nice plan to exit. It's going to be 12 months. We're going to design a succession plan, and there's going to be a lot of room going to be opened up. But I don't want people to behave badly, and some will, because that's what humans do when there's a power vacuum. But give more room.
It's a good way to suss out the people underneath you that might want to overthrow the emperor.
No.
Well, that sort of goes one of the things with the Jack Welch stuff, which was the former CEO of GE specifically told Jack that he was getting he was being given something in trust, and Jack's response was not exactly that I am merely the captain of the ship for this leg of the voyage. That was not how he was thinking.
And so, like, you bring up GE. GE used to do something really, really intelligent. They trained managers at different levels for different roles. So a middle manager in GE actually got trained to be a middle manager. And then when they moved up or were paying to, they got groomed to move up. They were trained. We might agree with how they were trained, but they actually spent the time and money to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Speaking about GE.
Uh-oh. We're getting a last second hot take.
I've spent the last, let's call it month and a half at various points in time trying to figure out why my fucking Apple TV wouldn't work correctly with my Samsung television and my Samsung soundbar? And the answer was a bad fucking GE cable, HDMI cable.
Would you like me to pull up the history of the chat where we said it was a bad HDMI cable?
That was a different problem. That actually wasn't this problem. But yeah, it was the only cable that I didn't replace because I didn't install it. It was installed in the wall. You know, it was so the installer decided to cheap out on the cable and bought a GE cable.
But is GE make cables, or is it Jesco or some other company now?
Oh, I'm sure it's no longer GE. If GE parted off itself and sold it for
it wasn't making 45% profits. I gotta go take that money and put it into mortgages.
GE Capital.
All right, Dr. Mike, thank you for joining us. And I'm not going to thank you for another book for me to read. It always ends this way, though. You always end up giving me a book, but thank you.
Don't worry.
John, have a good night. Thank you.
I'm sure we'll end up with 2 more by the end of the week.
It sounds fantastic. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to another episode of our podcast. To support us, please subscribe on LinkedIn, Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. We love feedback. You can reach us at feedback@biteswisdom.com. Until next time, stay curious.